What happens when the perfect image of family life shatters in the most unimaginable way? Jennifer Pan appeared to have it all: a loving family, a promising future, and the support of her parents, who had high expectations for her success. But behind the facade of a dutiful daughter was a simmering resentment that would lead to a chilling act of betrayal. In 2010, Jennifer orchestrated the brutal murder of both of her parents, all in the name of freedom. What drove this young woman to commit such a violent crime? Was it the pressure of perfection, or was there something darker brewing within? This is the tragic story of Jennifer Pan, a daughter whose desire for escape led to the deadly destruction of everything she once held dear. Before we dive into this unbelievable case, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you won't miss any of the chilling cases we cover. It was a quiet evening in Markham, Ontario, Canada, on November 8, 2010, when the Pan family's lives were forever shattered. A simple phone call, a desperate cry for help, would lead to a series of events that no one could have anticipated. But behind the scenes, something much darker was silently waiting to emerge, a betrayal so deep that it would rip apart everything the Pan family had ever known. A betrayal that would come from someone they trusted most, their only child. The Pan family had always been close-knit, bound by the love and sacrifice that comes with the immigrant experience. Bich Ha and Huy Han Pan, both immigrants from Vietnam, worked tirelessly to provide for their daughter, Jennifer. They were the epitome of hard-working parents, raising their only child with dreams of a bright future, one filled with success, education, and prosperity. But as their dreams for Jennifer grew, so did the tension. Beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family dynamic, resentment began to simmer. Jennifer, under the weight of her parents' unrelenting expectations, began to feel cornered, trapped in a life she could neither escape nor control. She longed for independence, for a life that wasn't dictated by the rigid standards set by her parents. But she couldn't bear the thought of disappointing them, and so, she lied. Jennifer, brilliant and yet burdened by deceit, told her parents she was succeeding, that she was attending the University of Toronto, excelling in her studies, volunteering at a children's hospital. In truth, she had dropped out of school long ago, living a life full of secrets, one she couldn't keep forever. And so, in her search for freedom, Jennifer turned to something far darker than she could have ever imagined. A plan so devious, so cold, it would make her the architect of her family's destruction. What began as a desperate attempt to escape her parents' control would end in tragedy, a tragedy that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. But who was Jennifer Pan? And what would drive her, a daughter of immigrants, to betray the very people who loved her most? The answers lie in the unraveling of a story that no one could have predicted. A story where love, lies, and ultimately, betrayal, converge in the most devastating way imaginable. Jennifer Pan was born into a world of high expectations. As the only child of Bich Ha and Huy Han Pan, both immigrants from Vietnam, her life was shaped by the weight of her parents' dreams and sacrifices. They came to Canada seeking a better life, determined to provide for their daughter in ways that they never could have imagined for themselves. Their hopes for Jennifer were immense, a future that was bright, secure, and filled with the promise of success. But for Jennifer, this dream came at a price. From a young age, she was told that there was only one way to achieve success: through perfect performance. Her parents, instilled with the values of their homeland, adhered to what's often called tiger parenting, a strict, demanding approach to child-rearing that leaves little room for failure. For Bich Ha and Huy Han, their daughter's education and achievements were paramount. They believed that anything less than excellence was unacceptable, and they pushed Jennifer relentlessly toward that goal. While most children may have received encouragement and praise for their efforts, Jennifer's life was governed by rules, limits, and constant pressure. There was no room for mistakes, no room for error, and certainly no room for anything that might even hint at imperfection. The small victories she might have celebrated as a young girl were overshadowed by the looming presence of her parents' expectations. Every academic success was met with praise, but that praise was always followed by the pressure to do even better. By the time Jennifer reached her teenage years, she had become a product of this intense environment, brilliant, but emotionally constrained. Her academic record was nothing short of impressive, but the personal toll of these achievements was starting to show. While Jennifer excelled in school, the emotional weight of her parents' expectations began to take its toll. She started feeling like she was living for someone else, trapped in a life that didn't feel like her own. The emotional isolation Jennifer felt deepened with each passing year. She yearned for freedom, for the chance to live life on her own terms, yet she didn't know how to break free from the relentless demands of her parents. Every attempt at independence seemed futile in the face of their overwhelming control. Jennifer found herself living in a world of contradictions, brilliant on the outside, but suffocating on the inside. Yet, the deeper she sank into her role as the perfect daughter, the more she craved something beyond the walls of academic achievement and familial duty. There was a world she longed to escape to, a world that her parents neither understood nor allowed her to explore. And it was in this desire for freedom that Jennifer found the first cracks in her carefully constructed life. As Jennifer entered adulthood, the weight of her family's expectations continued to follow her like a shadow. But beneath the facade of academic success, something far darker began to take shape. Jennifer, the model student, the perfect daughter, was living a lie so elaborate that even her parents, blinded by their own hopes for her future, never questioned it. Jennifer had dropped out of school long ago. The dreams she had once shared with her parents, of a successful university career, had withered away. Yet she continued to pretend. She told them she was attending the University of Toronto, living a life full of promise, immersed in her studies. She crafted every detail of her fake academic life, phone calls from supposed professors, fabricated reports of her volunteer work at a children's hospital, and even stories about her busy schedule. Her parents, ever hopeful, believed it all. To them, Jennifer was the golden child, the one who would make their sacrifices worthwhile. They saw her as their investment, the fruit of their years of hard work. What they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was the growing sense of desperation behind Jennifer's perfect facade. Jennifer's lies didn't end with her education. She had another secret, one far more dangerous, one that would shatter the fragile world she had constructed. It was Daniel Wong, a young man her parents had never approved of. He was everything they feared, rebellious, involved in criminal activities, and from a background that seemed far beneath their standards. Jennifer knew they would never accept him, so she kept him hidden, her relationship with him a secret for years. But as the lies piled up, so did the emotional burden. Jennifer had created an entirely different world for herself, one where she was free to make her own choices, to love who she wanted, to live without the constant judgment of her parents. She wasn't just lying about school or work, she was lying about who she was. Yet the guilt gnawed at her. Every day was a performance. She was playing a role, and like any role, it became harder to keep up the illusion. Every time she lied, it felt like she was sinking deeper into a place where escape seemed impossible. Her real self, the person she longed to be, was fading beneath the lies she had created. And then, like a spark that ignites a wildfire, Jennifer's secret world begins to unravel. The pressure to keep up the facade became too much to bear. She knew that if the truth came out, if her parents discovered the extent of her deception, her life would come crashing down. The perfect daughter would be exposed for the fraud she was. And Jennifer couldn't let that happen. The fear of being discovered, the fear of losing everything, drove Jennifer to the unthinkable. She began to see only one way out, a way to rid herself of the life her parents had built for her, a life that no longer fit the person she had become. But as Jennifer looked at Daniel Wong, the only person who seemed to understand her, she realized that her desperation could lead her to do something irreversible. And so, she began to entertain the darkest of thoughts, thoughts that, at one time, might have seemed impossible. The bond between a child and their parents is often seen as sacred, a connection built on love, trust, and shared experiences. But for Jennifer Pan, that bond had become a cage. Her parents, Bich Ha and Hui Han, had always been loving, though their love came with strings attached. It wasn't the warm, unconditional love many children experience. It was the kind that demanded success, perfection, and unwavering discipline. Jennifer's parents, immigrants from Vietnam, had sacrificed everything to give her a better life in Canada. They had worked long hours in jobs that required sweat and toil, all for the promise of a better future. Their dream was to see Jennifer succeed, to see her rise above the struggles they had faced in their own lives. And they believed that their daughter would carry that dream forward, that she would live the life they could never have. But as the years went by, Jennifer began to feel suffocated. The love her parents gave her, though genuine, came with an invisible chain. Every achievement, every success, was met with approval, but with the unspoken expectation that there was always more to be done. They never let up. They couldn't, not when they saw the promise of success within their reach. Jennifer, despite her outward achievements, was drowning in their expectations. The pressure to excel became her prison. The academic successes they celebrated were hollow victories because Jennifer had lost something much more vital in the process: her sense of self. The person she wanted to be was lost beneath the weight of her parents' ambitions. Her life became a cycle of lies, deceit, and quiet rebellion. She was trapped between the image of perfection her parents wanted to see and the reality of her own desires. She wanted to make her parents proud, but she couldn't escape the suffocating grip of their control. What she longed for more than anything was freedom. Freedom to choose her own path, to be with the people she loved, to live life on her own terms. But there was one thing Jennifer had never anticipated: how much it would hurt to betray the very people who had given her everything. Despite the tension, despite the emotional distance that had grown between them, Jennifer still loved her parents. It was that love, the love she felt for them and the love they felt for her, that made the betrayal all the more devastating. Jennifer wasn't just lying to them. She was betraying them, breaking the very trust that had been the foundation of their relationship. Every time she told another lie, every time she hid another secret, it was like carving a deeper wound in the bond they shared. She knew what she was doing was wrong, but the fear of being exposed, the fear of disappointing them, had become more terrifying than anything else. What Jennifer didn't realize, though, was that her parents had begun to notice the distance between them. They were not blind to her strange behavior or the increasing number of unexplained absences. And as much as they loved her, as much as they wanted to believe in the lies, something in the back of their minds began to question the life she was presenting them. But in their hearts, they held on to the hope that Jennifer would one day open up, that she would return to the daughter they once knew. And so, they kept believing, kept trusting, even as the foundation of their relationship began to crumble. When Jennifer Pan met Daniel Wong, it was as if she had finally found someone who could understand the struggle she was facing, the suffocating weight of her parents' expectations, the constant pressure to perform, the isolation of living a life full of lies. Daniel, with his rebellious nature and disregard for authority, represented everything her parents disapproved of, everything she longed for. He was a stark contrast to the well-mannered, obedient young men her parents had hoped she would associate with. Daniel came from a background that Jennifer's parents would never have accepted, a world far removed from their vision of success. He was involved in drugs and criminal activities, and yet, to Jennifer he seemed like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in years, she felt like she could be herself around someone who didn't judge her or demand perfection. With Daniel, she found an escape, a way out of the life that had been forced upon her. At first, Jennifer's relationship with Daniel was secretive, hidden away from the watchful eyes of her parents. She knew that if they discovered the truth, they would never approve. And so, she continued to live the lie, pretending to be the obedient daughter they wanted her to be, while secretly dating Daniel, finding solace in the time they spent together. But as their relationship deepened, so did Jennifer's desperation. She had grown tired of living in fear of her parents' discovery. She longed for a life where she didn't have to lie, where she didn't have to hide her true self. She wanted freedom, not just from the oppressive expectations of her parents, but from the facade she had built. Daniel, the one person who seemed to offer her the escape she so desperately sought, became her partner in this dark journey. It was Daniel who first suggested the unthinkable. He knew that Jennifer was living in a world of lies, that she was trapped in a cycle of deceit. He understood her need to break free, to escape the life her parents had forced upon her. And so, he planted the seed of an idea that would forever change the course of their lives. "Why not end it all?" he said. "Why not make it so that your parents can never hurt you again? If they're out of the picture, you'll be free. We'll be free." Jennifer, initially taken aback by the suggestion, found herself drawn to the idea. The thought of living without the constant pressure, the thought of never having to hide who she really was again, was tempting. But she struggled with the enormity of the act. Taking her parents' lives, the very people who had given everything for her, was beyond comprehension. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about her freedom, her future, a future where she could live on her own terms. As the days passed, Jennifer wrestled with the decision. But the more she thought about it, the more appealing the idea became. Her parents had given her everything, but in doing so, they had stolen something from her, her sense of autonomy, her identity. They had controlled every aspect of her life, and now, she saw only one way to escape their hold. She believed that if they were no longer around, she could finally be free. Jennifer, now fully consumed by the idea of murder, began to plan. She reached out to Daniel, and together, they recruited two men, Lenford Roy Crawford and Eric Sean Carty. They were to be the ones to carry out the unthinkable. The plot was set in motion, and Jennifer became the mastermind, orchestrating every detail with cold precision. The plan was simple: break into the family home, murder her parents, and leave the scene without a trace. Jennifer would play the role of the innocent victim, the helpless daughter who had been attacked by intruders. It was the perfect crime, or so she thought. But even as the plan took shape, Jennifer couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of guilt. How could she do this to her own family? How could she betray the people who had sacrificed so much for her? Yet, the fear of being discovered, of losing the life she had built in secret, was stronger than any moral dilemma. The desire for freedom, for a life where she could be herself, pushed her toward an irreversible decision. November 8, 2010, began as an ordinary day for the Pan family. In the early morning hours, Bitch Ha and Hui Han Pan went about their daily routines, unaware that their lives were about to be shattered forever. Their only daughter, Jennifer, who had spent years hiding her truth beneath a veil of lies, was now playing her part in the most twisted deception of all. By this time, Jennifer's plan was in motion. She had recruited two men, Lenford Roy Crawford and Eric Sean Carty, to help carry out the brutal attack on her parents. It was a plan that Jennifer had spent days carefully constructing, with every detail designed to ensure the tragedy would appear to be a random home invasion. Her role would be the same as always: the victim, the daughter who had been attacked along with her parents. But this time, her victimhood would be more than just a role to play. It would be the final lie in a life built on nothing but deceit. That night, Jennifer set the stage. She made sure her parents were home, knowing that they would be settled in for the evening. It wasn't unusual for the family to spend their nights together, but Jennifer's heart pounded with every passing moment, knowing what was about to happen. She had prepared herself emotionally for this moment, but as the hours ticked by, the weight of what she was about to do began to sink in. It was too late to back out now. The gunmen arrived at the Pan home, armed and ready to carry out the chilling plan. They forced their way into the house and immediately confronted the Pan family. In the chaos of the attack, Jennifer played her part to perfection. She screamed, calling out for help, pretending to be a helpless victim. The two men who had come to kill her parents did their job. They attacked with brutal force, shooting Bitch Ha multiple times and critically wounding Hui Han. But Jennifer didn't just stand by. She was the orchestrator of the carnage, the mastermind behind the scene. She knew that her parents would never survive this attack, that their deaths would clear the path for her to live the life she had always longed for. It wasn't just a murder, it was her escape. The sound of the gunshots, the bloodshed, the terror in her parents' eyes, none of it fazed her. She had long since numbed herself to the weight of her decisions. The deed was done, and Jennifer felt only a fleeting sense of relief. The aftermath was chaotic. Jennifer called 911, her voice trembling with feigned fear as she reported the attack. "I think they're dead," she said, as if she had just witnessed a random, senseless tragedy. To the outside world, Jennifer was the grieving daughter, the victim of a horrific crime. But beneath the surface, she knew the truth: She had orchestrated it all. In the moments after the attack, Jennifer must have felt a strange calm wash over her. Her parents, the ones who had controlled every aspect of her life, were gone. She was free. Or so she thought. The world would never know the truth. The pain she had felt from years of deceit, from the lies she had built, seemed to vanish in the wake of their deaths. But even as Jennifer stood in the aftermath, pretending to be the innocent victim, something began to gnaw at her. How long could she keep the lie going? How long could she convince the world that she was the helpless daughter, the one who had suffered the most? She had planned this moment so meticulously, but in the chaos of her emotions, something was missing, the feeling of liberation she had expected. Instead, Jennifer found herself alone in her deception, trapped once again. Her plan had succeeded in ending the lives of her parents, but she had not anticipated the emotional fallout that would come with it. And as the investigation into the crime began, Jennifer would soon realize that the walls she had carefully constructed around her life were about to come crumbling down. The 911 call had barely ended before the Pan family's world began to unravel. Jennifer, the grieving daughter, played her part perfectly, her voice trembling as she reported the attack. But behind the scenes, the truth began to slip through the cracks, and with each passing moment, the deception she had woven so carefully started to disintegrate. At first, the authorities believed Jennifer's version of events. The scene appeared to be exactly as she had described: a violent home invasion, a senseless attack by unknown gunmen. But as the investigation unfolded, the cracks in Jennifer's story began to show. The inconsistencies in her account, the oddness in her behavior, began to raise suspicion. Jennifer's father, Hui Han Pan, though severely injured and left permanently blind by the attack, was still alive. He was able to provide a different perspective, one that would eventually expose the horrifying truth behind the crime. He was not the helpless victim Jennifer had painted him to be. His testimony, coupled with the evidence that investigators began to uncover, started to paint a picture that no one could have imagined. As detectives sifted through the details of the case, they uncovered key pieces of evidence that slowly chipped away at Jennifer's carefully crafted lies. First, they learned that Jennifer had been in contact with Daniel Wong and the two accomplices before the attack, not just in passing, but in a way that suggested premeditation. It wasn't just a crime of passion, it was calculated, planned, and executed with chilling precision. Jennifer's attempt to portray herself as a victim, as someone who had been attacked by strangers, began to fall apart. The truth came crashing down when investigators discovered that the intruders, the ones who had supposedly barged into the family's home, were in fact hired by Jennifer herself. The plan, the motivation, and the manipulation were all revealed in an instant. As the evidence mounted, Jennifer's world began to crumble. The lies she had lived by, the deception she had perfected, could no longer shield her from the truth. She was arrested, and in the days that followed, the full scale of her betrayal became clear. The woman who had been the golden child, the perfect daughter, had orchestrated the murder of the very people who had given her life. The depth of her betrayal was unimaginable, and the emotional impact of her actions reverberated throughout her family, her community, and the public at large. Her father, the man who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family, who had loved his daughter unconditionally, was left to grapple with the staggering reality of what had happened. Not only had he lost his wife in a brutal and senseless murder, but he had also lost the trust and love of his own daughter. The emotional devastation for Hui Han was profound, and the shock of being betrayed by the one person he had believed would never hurt him was more than he could bear. Jennifer, now facing a future behind bars, would spend the rest of her life coming to terms with the consequences of her actions. Her hope for freedom, for a life of independence, had come at an unimaginable cost. Her story, once filled with dreams and aspirations, was now defined by the darkest of deeds. When the dust finally settled and the full extent of Jennifer Pan's actions came to light, the public was left stunned. A young woman, seemingly destined for greatness, had chosen the darkest path imaginable, one that led to the violent deaths of her parents, the very people who had sacrificed so much to give her a better life. The betrayal was not just of her parents but of everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of. Jennifer's story became a chilling example of the destructive power of unmet expectations and the dangerous consequences of living a lie. Her life had been built on a foundation of deceit, a web of falsehoods spun to escape the crushing weight of her parents' love and ambition. She had been unable to reconcile the life they envisioned for her with the person she truly was, and in her desperation to break free, she turned to murder as her solution. But in the end, freedom came at a price she could never have anticipated. Jennifer's actions left a permanent scar on her family, particularly on her father, who had not only lost his wife but also his only child in the most horrific way. He was left to grapple with the emotional devastation of the betrayal, never fully able to comprehend how the daughter he had raised, loved, and protected could have done such a thing. For Jennifer, the aftermath was equally unforgiving. She was sentenced to life imprisonment for her role in the murder of her mother and the near-fatal wounding of her father. But the sentence was not just a punishment for the crime she had committed, it was a lifelong sentence of regret, of knowing that the path she had chosen had irrevocably destroyed her family, her future, and any chance at redemption. As the years passed, the story of Jennifer Pan became a subject of public fascination and media attention. Documentaries, articles, and interviews tried to piece together the puzzle of her life, how a daughter, seemingly full of promise, could turn so cold and calculating. The tragic irony of her story, a young woman who had been given everything, yet felt suffocated by the very love that should have set her free, became a cautionary tale about the perils of extreme parental pressure, the destructive nature of lies, and the high cost of living in a world built on deception. Jennifer's case also sparked a larger conversation about the pressures faced by young people, particularly those from immigrant families, who often bear the weight of their parents' dreams and expectations. It raised difficult questions about the boundaries of parental love, the impact of unrealistic expectations on mental health, and the consequences of living a life that isn't truly your own. As we reflect on Jennifer Pan's story, we are reminded of the fragility of human relationships, the complexity of family dynamics, and the profound consequences of betrayal. It is a story that challenges us to consider the emotional toll of high expectations, the danger of living a double life, and the devastating impact of choosing freedom at the expense of everything you once held dear. The question that lingers long after the story ends is this: what drives a person to betray the very people who gave them everything? The answer, perhaps, lies in the struggle to reconcile who we are with who we are expected to be. And in Jennifer Pan's case, it was a struggle that ultimately led to a tragedy of unimaginable proportions.